Welcome to our service tonight. It's a little sparse, but if you're visiting with us, thank you very much for coming. Glad to have you. And I was fearful that I wasn't even going to get here on time. I left the house at 20 after 6, and I just barely got here. It's like a zoo. I don't understand why we had all that traffic. And in fact, I went down Eustic for a ways and got about halfway to Eagle Road and said, this is going nowhere. So I turned around thinking that I could make a better time over on Fairview. So I came back to Cloverdale and took it over to Fairview and then headed up. Well, I barely could turn the corner at Fairview because it was all backed up. So anyway, I don't know what's going on to cause all the traffic tonight, but man, it was terrible for me.
When you remember in college, always 10 minutes, button there or button there.
Yeah. Sounds good. Welcome, everyone, and for those of you online, thank you so much for joining us. If you can, please do check in so we could have a record of your attendance, because we'd enjoy being able to see who's with us, so we're thankful for that. Well, last week we had a special little thing called Thanksgiving and Devo, so we didn't have a class, so I didn't give you the opportunity to know what to expect for tonight. So for tonight's lesson, we're going to talk about wise use of your time and how Proverbs, Solomon addresses the wise use of your time. You know, and as we think about that, there's many of us who know how to use our time wisely and how to prepare for things and how to plan for things and how to put ourselves in a position that we are able to forward ourselves down the road. But then there's others of us who maybe don't use our time so wisely, and we wind up always behind the proverbial 8-ball, if you will. Not sure what that actually means, behind the 8-ball, but it's a phrase we use all the time. And so those kinds of people use their time, and some of us use our time unwisely. And we waste our time, and we're not productive at what we do, and we're not thinking of, what I need to be doing down the road. And that causes us perhaps to embrace the concept of being a bit on the lazy side. And so I was thinking about being productive versus lazy, and I thought about that classic example that shows, I think, the difference between being lazy and productive from a well-known Aesop fable. And you'll all remember this fable, probably, the ant and the grasshopper. The ant and the grasshopper. And if you don't remember, I'm going to have you remember, because I got some slides here that will help us remember what this was all about. Aesop's fable. In a field one summer's day, a grasshopper was hopping about, chirping and singing to its heart's content. An ant passed by, bearing along with great toil an ear of corn he was taking to the nest. "Why not come and chat with me?" said the grasshopper, "instead of toiling and moiling in that way." "I'm helping to lay up food for the winter," said the ant, "and I recommend that you do the same." "Why bother about winter?" said the grasshopper. "We have got plenty of food at present." But the ant went on its way and continued to toil. When winter came, the grasshopper had no food, found itself dying of hunger, while it saw the ants distributing every day corn and grain from the stores they had collected in the summer. When we fail to prepare for our future home, and hopefully all of the people here, our future home is in heaven. So as we prepare for that, we'll suffer the consequences of laziness if we don't apply these kinds of principles to that. The book of Proverbs has much to say about how we could use our time wisely and by being diligent workers instead of lazy ones like our friend the grasshopper. So much like the ant and the grasshopper, we'll discover how wise it is to be diligent instead of lazy. Let's see what Solomon says. Oh, I forgot the last one. Sorry. Well, we knew what I was going to say. Solomon says in Proverbs 6 through 11, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man." Don't you find it interesting how Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs somewhere around 700 BC? And Aesop wrote his fables somewhere around the 6th century AD. That's about a 1,300-year span apart. So with that, I'm wondering if Aesop might have been a plagiarizer. I don't know. There's no way to prove that. But does it seem funny to me that we have almost the exact same story, just a little bit of twist here and a little twist there, to Aesop's story that matches this very verse. So maybe Aesop was smarter than most and used the Bible to help him develop his thought process, perhaps. I don't know, and there's no way for us to know. But it's interesting to ponder that. Solomon uses the ant as an example how we are to be diligent in whatever we do. You know, and we've seen those programs, the PBS type programs that show you how ants are so busy and they jump around and they go here and go there and do their thing, and they're always moving and all this kind of stuff and planting or bringing stuff to their nest. We've seen those, and we see how ants work. They take advantage of every opportunity, I think, to prepare their home for the days when it's not fit to work. So they explore their area looking for food, and always, once they find it, carrying it back to their home so they can store it. When things get in an ant's way, that ant will find a way around that, or seems to be able to find a way around it, or go through it, or move it, do something so that they aren't interrupted with the mission that they are on, which is getting their food to their home. So if we want to use, I think, our time wisely, we must learn from the ant, take advantage of the time we have, whether it be laboring for our families or for God's kingdom. Paul had something to say in Ephesians 5:16 about this. "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil." Jesus had a similar comment in John 9:4. "When we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. I think Jesus knew his work would be short on this earth, so he pressed forward every day doing God's will, carrying out the will of the Father, if you will, and then to prepare the disciples for being by themselves and knowing what to do moving forward without Jesus being there. I think in this verse, the night that Jesus speaks of, I think that refers not necessarily to an actual night. I think it refers to death, when we can't do anymore, when we are done working, or when we are done having the opportunity to work. So Solomon teaches his son that the sluggard, who simply folds his hands and sleeps all the time, will not be successful in his life. He will find himself in want, and that verse says, in deep poverty. So, like the grasshopper, the lazy will find themselves envying what the diligent have. So, our mission, of course, is to be the diligent, not the lazy. So, it's much wiser then to be a diligent worker, I think, and spend the time that we have doing the work that God has set before us, as opposed to being lazy. So, let's look at some other Proverbs verses, or other verses from Proverbs. I'll get it out. The book of Proverbs encourages us not to be lazy. Proverbs 24:30 through 34. I passed by the field of the sluggard, and by the vineyard of the man lacking sense, and behold, it was completely overgrown with thistles. Its surface was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. When I saw, I reflected upon it. I looked, and I received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Then your poverty will come as a robber, and your want like an armed man. You would have thought that I just read that verse. But Solomon repeats it. So it must be important. So I think it's important to recognize the very concept that Solomon is putting forward to us. Of course, maintaining a vineyard is a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to maintain a vineyard. The text tells us what happens when a lazy man is left in charge of the vineyard. He allows the thorns to grow, he doesn't keep the ground free of nettles, and he fails to keep the protective wall in shape. His laziness will not allow the vineyard to grow like it should, which means it's going to yield very little produce, and in this case, very few grapes. So, since he's more interested in resting, he will soon find himself, as this verse says, in poverty. Laziness gets nothing done. If we are not careful, we too could get caught up, I think, in this bad habit. Solomon says in Proverbs 20, verse 4, the lazy man will not plow because of winter. He will beg during harvest and have nothing. It seems to me that what Solomon is saying is that laziness begets laziness. So, and I think if I understand what he's saying, the more lazy we are, the more lazy we want to be. And so it's just a snowball effect, if you will. Once we convince ourselves that it's too cold, or it's too hot, or it's too wet, or it's too windy, we pretty soon won't be doing anything, because we'll get to the point where the conditions will never be right for us to do anything. And so in this verse, I think we can see that very idea. But not to fear, Solomon's got more. Proverbs 26, 13 through 14. The lazy man says, There is a lion in the road. A fierce lion is in the streets. As a door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. The lazy man buries his hand in the bowl. It wearies him to bring it back to his mouth. When the lazy say things like this, the lion is in the road. Rather than doing something about it, they are just giving excuses because they don't want to do anything about it, because Solomon says they're too lazy to do anything about it. The lazy can use just about any excuse to justify, I think, not working, no matter how ridiculous it might seem. Yet, the lazy are always ready to share in the fruits of other people's labors. I'm reminded of a little story called the Little Red Hen. Some of you might remember this story. I happened to find a little video. So we're back to the video again. We'll see if we get zapped by YouTube. This is a cute little story, but I think it has a point to it.
The Little Red Hen. The Little Red Hen lived on a big farm with all kinds of animals. One day, while she was walking, the Little Red Hen came across some seeds. She decided to plant them. "Who will help me?" she asked her friends. "Not I," said the bull. "Not I," said the mouse. "Not I," said the dog. "Then I'll do it," said the Little Red Hen. And so she planted all of the seeds by herself. It took a while, but the seeds grew into a field of wheat. "Who will help me cut the wheat?" asked the Little Red Hen. "Not I," quacked the duck. "Not I," meowed the cat. "Not I," brayed the bull. The Little Red Hen sighed and said, "Then I'll do it." And she cut the wheat all by herself. After cutting all the wheat, the Little Red Hen just wanted to rest. But her work wasn't done yet. "Who will help me take the wheat to the mill to be ground into flour?" she asked. "Not I," squeaked the mouse. "Not I," barked the dog. "Not I," quacked the duck. "Then I'll do it," said the Little Red Hen, and she took the wheat to be ground, and then she carried the heavy sack of flour all the way back to the farm. The exhausted Little Red Hen then asked her friends, "Who will help me bake the bread?" "Not I," said the cat. "Not I," said the bull. "Not I," said the dog. The Little Red Hen said, "Then I guess I'll bake it myself." Once the bread was finished, the Little Red Hen asked, "Who will help me eat this bread?" "We will," said the duck and the dog. "Us too," said the bull and the cat. "And don't forget me," said the mouse. "Nope," said the Little Red Hen. "This bread is for those who worked on it." And then she relaxed and enjoyed all of her hard work. Thanks for watching.
Again, obviously this is a cute little video, but I think the principle that the video brings forth is the same principle that Solomon is bringing forth to us through his words and through his teaching about laziness versus working. And the whole idea, I believe, is for us not to lose focus of what God put us on this earth for. And that's to do his mission, and not for us to say, well, somebody else is going to do that. Richard's going to do that. Clint's going to do that. Charles is going to do that, and I can just sit back. That's not God's mission, and I think Solomon is trying to tell us that isn't what we should be doing. Paul has some instructions to the Thessalonians about this principle as well. 2 Thessalonians 3:10. "For even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. And that's clearly strong words with regards to that, and we would feel compassion for most people, but we know also that there are people that are simply takers and never are givers. And so that's kind of the idea. So there's many people in our country, I believe, that are certainly capable of working, but they sometimes, or it seems, they're just too lazy to work because they'd rather let the government or someone else provide for them. And you can picture in your mind all of those scenarios, and I'm not going to bring them forth, but you can picture in your mind what that actually is talking about. So those, I think, who take advantage of generosity of others who may not need it would learn to overcome their laziness if Paul's words, if these words, were part of our law system. And that is not trying to be hateful, and please don't understand that comment, but I'm not talking about those people who honestly need help. But there's a lot of people out there who have their hands out for whatever that are only, in my view, pretending to need help just so that they can get some sort of handout. A couple of more verses. Proverbs 13:4, the soul of a lazy man desires and has nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made rich. 26:16, the lazy man is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. The lazy think they're smarter than the rest of us because they can find people who will give them those handouts. They'll give them money, they'll give them food, they'll give them clothing, but they never have enough. They're always in want. If they would simply open their eyes and see in my view, the folly of their laziness, they could see that they're easily capable of getting those kinds of things that they desire instead of having nothing if they would just work. They choose not to. God gave us all choice. That's a choice that they make, and that's a choice that is contrary to what we're seeing in Scripture. All of that takes some motivation and ambition to provide for a more enjoyable existence, not only for themselves, but for their families. Paul offers some strong words as well for people who don't take care of their families. 1 Timothy 5:8, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So what's the principle? Don't work at it. And so God intended for man to work. During the time of Moses, 6 days were for work, and the 7th day was for rest. Exodus 23:12. 6 days you are to do your work, but on the 7th day you shall cease from labor, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female slave as well as your stranger may refresh themselves. So this idea of work and rest fall hand in hand. God intended to do that. Even God wants us to stay busy, but he understands the need for rest. And you'll remember, again, back to Genesis, that first chapter or two, God rested from his labors after 6 days of creation. Jesus recommended also to his disciples that they rest from their labors because they hadn't had time to eat. In Mark 6:31, and he said to them being the disciples, come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest for a while. For there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. There's a big difference, though, between resting from our labors and being lazy. Because the diligent only rest to refresh themselves and so that they can do more work or they can go back to work again. But the lazy, seems, they just rest to be resting some more. So it's just, again, a constant thing. The book of Proverbs, I believe, encourages us to be diligent workers. Solomon talked about this in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you're going. There's kind of a frightening statement there. The diligent is highly motivated to do the best that they can, and that they would work for others as well as work for the Lord. Paul emphasizes again how Christians must be diligent workers in whatever they do in Colossians 3:23 and 24. Whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. When we work for others, we should work for them as if God was our boss. Which means we should work, as this says, heartily, or with enthusiasm is another word for that. Not only should we have a good work ethic in our jobs, I think we should give our best to God as we labor in His kingdom. Solomon again teaches us that there are many benefits for being a diligent worker. Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. Usually, hard work does not go unnoticed. Usually. No matter who we are working for, when we do our best, I think, we will gain their respect and stand out from the lazy. But there are those cases that even though we might be taken advantage of by our employer and are not recognized for our diligence, I think we can still rejoice because we should know as Christians that we are working for God. And so the work that we do, if it's at the very best of our ability, that God knows that what we're doing and God sees what we're doing and God takes note of that. And by doing that, certainly we glorify Him. When we use our time wisely, we can know it will cause us to be able to stand justified before the King of Kings. 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. So many verses in Proverbs about this. We're going to look at a couple more. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Proverbs 10:4. And in Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty. Many times the lazy tend to lose their jobs, but the diligent will usually excel in their jobs and will perhaps receive promotions, pay raises, and those kinds of things. The diligent do not just make plans and hope that their plans will happen. They make their plans happen, the diligent. The lazy make plans in their heads, but make no effort to make those plans come to fruition. A lack of ambition is almost always followed by failure in poverty. So those who are too lazy to work are also too lazy to fight for their freedoms and will be the ones who will always, I think, be under the authority of someone else. Proverbs 12:24. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be put to forced labor. The diligent will fight for their freedoms and will continuously, I think, pursue ways to provide for their families, which means they will usually be put in charge and rule over the lazy. Not all of the time, but not only will being diligent with our time cause us to have success in this life, it will cause us to have, of course, rewards in heaven, which we are all striving to do. Matthew 25:21. His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." And of course, this is back to that section of Scripture I talked about earlier about Matthew 25 and the talents. So, however, let's see. So I'm thinking, what is our application for tonight? What is our application? First, I think we must learn to use our time wisely while we live on this earth. I think we could look at it as our testing ground, if you will, of how serious we are at serving God. I think we also looked at scriptures tonight that taught us that the diligent are pleasing to God. And so that should be all of our ambitions, to always be pleasing to God in everything that we do, whether that's here in the church building or outside in the world. We should always be trying to be pleasing to God. And so I want to reflect one more time on Matthew 25 because I think it's an important scripture. So, 25:26 through 30. But his master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So, take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." For me, if those verses don't cause a little chill to go up your spine, I think they should. They ought to. They certainly do mine. It's a very, very forceful condemnation on this person who was given the opportunity to do what Jesus had asked him to do, and yet he turned away from that. He didn't do that. So while the diligent are held in high honor and praised for their efforts, the lazy are not admired, I should say, and nothing good is really said about them. So, our application as Christians, we must avoid being lazy in all aspects of our lives, and we should always give our best to God as we glorify him through the works that we do for him and for our families and for our church family and for the people that are in need. Comments or questions? Yep, Shelby. Right. Absolutely. Thank you. And for those of you at home, Shelby said, you sow what you reap, and you need to pay attention to those verses because they have dual meaning, not only for yourselves personally, but for spiritual ways as well. Thank you, Shelby. Anyone else? Oh, Nolan? Yeah, Nolan says we probably should be looking for things to do because sometimes those things just don't fall in our lap. So we should always be on guard, on watching for the opportunities that might present themselves. Thank you, Nolan. Others? Okay, next week. Let's see. We're going to see what Solomon says about how we should treat our neighbors. How should we treat our neighbors? And so be thinking about that. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Thank you at home for being with us and watching. And we'll look forward to next week. Thank you.